Hi everyone, and welcome to Life Prepared. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the food dehydrator. I have done a previous video very briefly before I went out of town to see my family, and I had some foods that would have gone bad if I left them in the refrigerator. I will link that down in the description if you'd like to take a look at it. But based on that video, I had a couple of questions: is how do I use the food, and really, how do you use this thing in general? So I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. One thing that I find handy when you're first learning what I call life skills, and this is one of my life skills. It's a skill that I learned on how to better take care of myself, be a little bit more self-sufficient in food security. This is one of them that I use. The reason I like the dehydrator is it's shelf stable for a very long time. If you get them dehydrated properly and properly packaged, I've had food on my shelf for 3-4 years that I've never touched, and I needed it, pulled it out of my stores and used it. So, yes, it's nice to have a freezer. That's very quick and easy. It's, nice to can the foods, but, if I want to go camping with my grandkids, I can grab a small bag of this, throw it in some boiling water, and I have a meal. But I wanted to tell you first, like I said, it's nice to have a book that teaches you a little bit about these life skills I'm going to be talking about. And this particular book is a Rodale Garden book. It's put out by Rodale Press. It's called Preserving Summer's Bounty. And it has a section on each life skill that I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to be giving this particular book away to somebody. They have a really nice section on drying foods. They have in this section, it talks about how to dry them. It does mention the freeze dryer, but if you don't have a couple $1,000, a freeze dryer may never be within your budget. But if you go to a garage sale and you find one of these like me for $8 and they last you for 30 years, you're definitely getting your money's worth out of it. Yes, a freeze dryer would be wonderful, but that's probably never going to be in my budget. It tells you some of the older ways that people used to preserve their foods. This is stringing beans on a thread, often referred to as leather breeches, and it's been done for hundreds of years. There's a little brief section on how you can make your own dehydrating trays and a heated dehydrator. And most importantly, it tells you how to do individual fruits and vegetables, how long they store, if they need to be blanched, and then a couple of uses for using the foods. There's a really good section, especially if you like dehydrated fruit like I do, or you have children, on how to make fruit leathers, such as those, I believe they're called roll-ups in the store, but those are all like sugar and other additives, where this can be done out of straight food. You could take applesauce, throw it on the tray, dehydrate it down, wrap it up, and your kids can take it with them to school. But anyway, I mentioned the book because once I hit 250 subscribers, I will announce a giveaway, and this book will be given away once our series is done on the different types of life skills that I use to put up food. Let me talk briefly about the dehydrator itself. This particular model is about as basic as you can get. It has an on-off switch, and the heat is concentrated at the bottom, and there's a little fan in there. It happens to blow the heat up. There's a lot of disadvantages to this one, but the big advantage to me is that I own it and I use it all the time. I put up things that will either go to waste, or I'm putting together some of my ready meal packs, which I will show you later on in the video. On these base models, this one has 5 trays. I apologize, the other 3 are in my dishwasher because they are dishwasher safe. That's the nice thing. But with this one, once I have all my trays stacked up, I have to come by every now and then and give it a little spin, because all of the heat in the fan is concentrated right here at the front of the dehydrator. So this food up here tends to get done really well, almost like a well done steak. You know, you just don't, at least me, I like mine closer to, you know, mid-rare. And this stuff at the back tends to stay wet a little bit longer. The food on the bottom tray dries a lot faster than the food on the top tray. So I have to come out every now and then. I'll spin these around and I will take the trays very carefully and I switch them around the levels so that I now have the top tray at the bottom and I keep rotating them down. This one does not have a temperature control, and that's probably the biggest hindrance to using this, because foods like yogurt should be done at a much lower temperature. This one tends to get somewhere around 140 to 150 degrees, depending on where you're at. And when I make yogurt, I like to have it closer to no more than 105 degrees, or you'll kill off the yogurt, the natural yogurt itself that you use to make it, and it no longer functions to make yogurt, to turn your milk, or in my case, goat's milk, into yogurt. So the biggest con on this is there's no temperature control, and that all of the heat tends to be concentrated in the bottom. The biggest pro to me is that I own it and I use it and I eat the food and it just works for what I paid for it. So if you're in the market to buy a dehydrator, a couple of things you're going to want to look for is, does it have a temperature control? I like, if I get a new one, I'm looking at, yes, an Excalibur would be wonderful. To me, one of the cons of the Excalibur is the price itself. They tend to range for a 9-tray model upwards of $300, and quite frankly, that's just not in my budget. They do have a temperature control, which is really nice, and the air circulates from the back of the machine across each tray, which gives the Excalibur much better even distribution of the heat. There are models that are much less expensive. I am looking at one called a Nesco, Nesco. The one I'm happening to look at is it's square because you get a little bit extra drying space, you know, having those corners on there. The Nesco has a temperature control, which is definitely a huge plus. The only difference is that it blows the air from the top down, but they have a special patented circulation process so that the air goes through a tube in the middle, comes up the sides, and helps preserve the food a little bit more even. So those range somewhere around $70 to $80. So that's definitely a price within my range. Okay, I cleaned up the mess around the dehydrator. And one of the things I really, really like to store, because it's one of my favorite extremely inexpensive meals, is fried rice. I use the eggs as my protein element. Now you could add chicken or shrimp or pork or whatever you have, but you know, my eggs are free. I raise chickens and I get a lot of eggs. I have chickens, turkeys, and ducks, so I get more eggs than I can use. I've frozen hundreds of them that I use in various recipes and such. And, you know, they take up a lot of space. This is 2 eggs that's been dehydrated down. The other one that shows the powdered eggs, that was 1 egg. I could put a dozen eggs in, you know, a tiny jar like this, easy, probably 2 dozen, and still have lots of space. So anyway, I'm going to show you how I do the fried rice. Now, I have in here, this is a 1 serving portion for me. There is a half a cup of the rice. This is not that instant rice stuff. This is the stuff you have to cook for 20 minutes. And how I like to do this is I take the rice, see if you can see that a little better, and I put in a teaspoon, not quite a full teaspoon, but I put in some, this is soy, this is how I cook mine. Now this, remember, it's just about 3/4 of a teaspoon. I'm going to dump that right into my rice. You're probably thinking, oh, but that's wet. That's okay. That's where a dehydrator comes in handy. I'm going to shake it up, get that in the rice. Shake it up really well. I'm coating the rice with my soy. Okay, once I get it, well shook up, I'm going to make sure I get it really, really good. And I'm going to put it out onto my dehydrator tray. I'm going to get the rest of this out before I'm done here. I use a spoon and I'll spread it all out. Or in this case, a fork, and I will spread it out all over my tray. See, this is why this really comes in handy. A parchment paper will work too. I'm going to spread this out, and I'll do this a little bit more after I get to the rest of this. And I spread it out, put my lid on, and turn it on. Okay, it's been about an hour since I put the rice with the soy sauce into my dehydrator. I've done this a few times, but what I do is I, of course, wash my hands really clean, or if you're worried, you could wear some gloves. And I'm feeling for clumps. See, this rice is kind of in a clump, so I break those up because if there's going to be any moisture, that's where it's going to be trapped in these little clumps of rice. So because I'm putting this away for long-term storage, I want to make sure that this is absolutely dry. I do not want even a speck of moisture in this rice. But again, I don't want to cook it so long that it takes on a different flavor. So it's been about an hour. And it feels really dry, but I did find some of those clumps. So for me to be 100% sure, I'm going to put it on for another half an hour. I'm going to make sure there's really no more clumps at all. And then I will be able to put my meal together to go into long-term storage. There's another one there, see? Okay, I shut this off a little bit ago just to make sure that I can feel, because you want it to be cool. And yes, the rice is definitely dry. You can see, look, it took on a little bit of a brownish color because of the soy. So for right now, I'm going to just put this in this jar. Let's move this over where you can see a little better. I'll take my rice. See if I can do this without spilling it all over the place. Love these funnels that you use for canning, are really nice for this. And let's get it into my jar. Now remember, this is pretty much one serving. Here we go. I've got the rice in the jar. I'm going to take my 2 eggs. They were previously scrambled and cooked and then dehydrated. Those are going in my jar. And I'm going to put in, I like a lot of pea pods in mine. That's the way I really like it. So I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of my dehydrated pea pods. You know what, that's about right there. Might be just a tad more, but that's okay. I'm going to add, now this is 3 baby carrots that I dehydrated. It actually comes out to be right at a tablespoon. I'm going to add that. I like a lot of veggies in mine, so, okay. I was thinking of adding some peppers, but in this batch, I'm not going to do that today. And instead, I am going to add in some of my chives. So these are kind of big. I just snip them up with my scissors when I dehydrate them. I'm going to take about a half a tablespoon. I'm going to crunch them up a little bit as I add them, because I want some onion flavor in there. And I think that's all I'm going to add. So what I do is I always write myself a little recipe. I have a half a cup of, this happens to be basmati rice. I put in the teaspoon of soy sauce, the 2 scrambled eggs that were cooked and dehydrated, 3 baby carrots, or a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons of the pea pods, they were chopped, and a half a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons of the pea pods, a half a tablespoon of the chives. Now, when I package this up, I'm going to do it with my food saver. Right now it's just in the jar. I'm going to make sure that this goes with my rice so that I know exactly when it was packaged and the directions on how to use it. But for now, I'm just going to put it in this jar. Now normally I would put it in a jar and I could shake it up, make sure everything's in there. See, doesn't that look nice? That's a full meal. That's a full, complete meal. I could, let's see if it fits in this smaller jar. Might be a little bit more than the jar can hold. Yeah, it's a little bit more. If I didn't put quite so many veggies in there, it would work. But I could put it in a jar like this, put in an oxygen absorber, and put on, not that cap, that's not going to work. I could put an oxygen absorber in here, put my lid on, and that would seal itself up and be shelf stable for a long time. I could write my recipe a little bit smaller and put it on the jar so I know what's inside. Or I could write it on the top, like add, how much water that I need and boil it. But there you go. That is a full meal for me at a later date. It's completely shelf stable. And I'm going to show you in the next video, when I talk about the food saver, how I put this away for my long-term storage. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. Please give me a thumbs up and don't forget the giveaway.